A little over a year ago, Vince Zampella over at Respawn Entertainment announced that he and the Respawn team were making a game, a Star Wars game, in fact. And we didn't know anything about this game other than what he immediately told us what the game was all about. The name of the game was called Jedi Fallen Order. It takes place between episodes 3 and 4, and the most important part, you get to hold a lightsaber. Yes, you get to hold a lightsaber. Fuck yeah! But of course, this was Respawn Entertainment that we were talking about, and they're most infamously known for making first-person shooters mainly because of the fact that they had made the Titanfall series, and before then, some of the employees that worked at Respawn Entertainment actually worked with Infinity Ward back when they were making Modern Warfare 2, and then they quit the team to make Respawn Entertainment, like I just said. And then afterwards, they made Titanfall, and then later on, they eventually made Apex Legends, a free-to-play battle royale game that we all know and love, right? We all love Apex Legends, right? 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 But no, they went ahead and announced that they were making a Star Wars game called Jedi Fallen Order, and people were, to say the least, and very rightfully so, very skeptical because did I say the word right? Skeptical? Yeah, that's the right word. They were very skeptical of whether or not this game was going to turn out really well because, of course, this game was made by Respawn Entertainment. They're mainly known for making first-person shooters and not really third-person action games. And then, of course, the publisher of the game was none other than voted twice in a row the worst company in all of America, I think that was. I'm not really sure. EA. EA was the publisher of the game. People were very scared and worried about whether or not they were going to fuck this game up like how they did with Battlefront 2. And for some reason, add microtransactions and loot supply drops and stuff like that. I don't know why I said supply drops. This is in Call of Duty. But people were very nervous and very scared about the game regardless. And rightfully so, because, again, the publisher was EA and they're known for fucking up Star Wars games pretty egregiously, to say the least. But alas, we finally got the game to release, and yeah, it was pretty good. I actually really enjoyed it. But the time frame of when the development time was is actually kind of surprising to me, as I finally did some research on when it was, because the game was announced on E3 2018. And then a little while after, towards April of 2019, we finally got the first trailer to come out. And then the game came out 7 months later in November 15th to be exactly. So, to say the least, they only had a little over a year of production time to even make this game in the first place, which we'll get to how it affects the game in a little bit when we actually get to the review part of this game. But to say the least, I think Respawn definitely did a very wound up job of making this game as good as they could in that short amount of time, because most games wouldn't actually be able to do that at all. You know, one of the best case scenarios that we can say that as an example is Fallout 76. Fallout 76 had no development time really and no real budget, I want to say, to even make the game in the first place. So, to say the least, Respawn Entertainment did a really good job with the time frame that they were given. So, without further ado, without stalling any longer, let's go ahead and actually get to the review process of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Combat was definitely the thing that I felt the most conflicted about. I wasn't really sure how the combat was gonna be because just off of the promotion trailers, mainly the first one, because that was really the only thing that I saw from Jedi Fallen Order, because at E3 2018 I didn't really see the EA press conference, and so I just didn't really pay attention to that, and I didn't really see if there was anything Jedi Fallen Order related that I really wanted to watch. So I had only saw the first trailer, and from the first trailer, it really seemed like that they were not going to allow you to be able to have a lightsaber, which I thought was going to be really weird, because obviously you're playing a Jedi and he has force powers. Why would you not be able to have a lightsaber? And then, of course, you know, later on, I found out that you are having a lightsaber, and the combat, when I first started playing, it felt really good. You know, the combat in this game is actually pretty good. Just wielding your lightsaber and throwing it around, and with later force abilities where you're able to throw your lightsaber and pull it back to you, having the force pull and push abilities respectively, having slow time is super cool, and just whacking dudes with your lightsaber and creatures, it's so cool. And then eventually, if you do your parry timings correctly, you can get these cool, special, unique animations for being able to properly parry certain attacks at the correct timing. And I thought that was super cool. I think lightsaber combat in this game is definitely some of my favorite that I've ever got to experience in a Star Wars game in general. But then I started fighting against more tougher enemies, and more specifically certain bosses. And that's where the combat started to really feel a little weird for me. And it's mainly because of the fact that there are times where hitboxes are really weird. The bosses and certain enemies start spamming unblockable attacks no matter what I do, and etc. etc. And granted, maybe this is all due because I was playing on the Jedi Grandmaster difficulty, the hardest difficulty in the game, for my first playthrough, and so maybe it just was a different experience for me than when I first started playing through this game, because I had already just finished, not, well, I didn't really finish it, but I had already went through a majority of the content that was in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and that game is pretty difficult as well, but I was still having a fun time playing through the game regardless of the fact that it was actually still pretty difficult. I was enjoying myself regardless of the difficulty of the game, and I enjoyed certain boss fights that I actually was able to completely master their patterns and their animations, and it felt like it was really fair towards me actually learning their animations of what attacks they were going to do. Throughout the entirety as I was playing through this game, there were just certain bosses where I just could never really understand what sort of attack patterns they were going to go through, specifically with Trilla, the final boss of the game. I was stuck on her for literally an entire day because I just could not get used to her attack patterns whatsoever. It just, every now and again she would just do something entirely different that was different from the other time that I had fought her, like the one that I had just previously done. She does one thing, and in the next fight when I go in after I respawn, or come back alive, she does something entirely different, and it just, I feel like I'm being punished for trying to learn her attack patterns, and that just was not fun, and I absolutely hated that. It just bothered the shit out of me. And then of course I have to deal with the enemies doing a lot of damage, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it was whatever, because I had already played through Sekiro. Like I said, Sekiro's difficulty levels isn't necessarily the fact that the enemies are unpredictable. It's more so the fact that they just do a lot of damage, and you have to be able to get around that as soon as possible. But then I started playing and experimenting with lower difficulties inside the game, and the thing that they also tell you is that the parry window is also shortened when you're playing on a Jedi Grandmaster difficulty. And at first I was just like, okay, whatever, just maybe they're just kind of lying to you for some reason. Maybe it's actually not that much of a significant difference. I already played through Sekiro, and Sekiro is all about having to get used to doing parrying and not so much dodging. There's a lot of attacks that you need to parry instead of dodging in Sekiro, and I thought the same thing was going to happen in Jedi Fallen Order. But more so than I did try to parry a lot of attacks, I more so just tried to dodge a lot of things, because it felt like the parry system in Jedi Fallen Order was just not worked correctly. It wasn't programmed correctly, and it just felt like there were so many attacks where I felt like I should have parried it, but for some reason I still either get hit or I just didn't parry it at all, and it just didn't do anything. And I didn't get any substantial advantage, and it felt really weird having that happen to me as I was playing through the entirety of the game on Jedi Grandmaster. And then I start going on the lower difficulties, and it's just significantly easier. Like, if you play on literally the story mode difficulty, kind of a bad example, but if you play on the story mode difficulty, the lowest difficulty possible, if you want to parry anything in the game besides unblockables, all you have to do is just click L1, or the block/parry button, once, and Cal just literally holds his lightsaber up, and he just holds it. He just holds it right in front of him, and if an enemy attacks you as Cal is doing that, he parries it just all by himself. And I was absolutely shocked that was a thing. But then again, it is supposed to be story mode difficulty. It's supposed to be extremely easy, and enemies aren't meant to do insane amount of damage. It's supposed to be significantly easier. But I just found that really funny, and just how much they, I guess in my opinion, just didn't really understand the parry system as best as they could. Because I feel like the parry, system should have worked the same way across all difficulties, and the only thing that would change is really the amount of damage the enemies are doing. It didn't really seem too fair on my side of of my playthrough because of the fact that I was playing on the hardest difficulty. And instead of having an enjoyable time, regardless of the difficulty, it just kind of pissed me off more than it did anything else. It was just entirely frustrating. There were certain boss fights that I just couldn't get past by. Um, the bounty hunters are extremely annoying because there's specifically like kind of like a mech slash robot one whose attack patterns are completely unpredictable, and I couldn't get around it. I died so many times against that one specific enemy. Trilla was literally the most annoying boss fight of the game for me because of the fact that I was stuck on her for literally a fucking day, and by the time that I finally beat her, I wasn't even sure if I was going to be able to enjoy the finale of the game, but luckily that didn't have any part onto that because as soon as I beat her, I fucking literally screamed at the top of my lungs because I was so hyped. I popped the hell off, and it was insane. The combat for this game was definitely just something that I think that they could have worked around a little bit. If you're playing on lower difficulties like Jedi Master and below, the combat's gonna feel incredible because, for the lack of a better term, and for what all the news media outlets are saying, you feel like a Jedi. Yes, you are a Jedi. You have force pull and force push. Excuse me. You can slow down enemies, and you can slow down blaster bullets, or blaster bolts, and you're able to pull enemies towards the blaster bolt that you had just slowed down. You have so much, free ability to be able to do whatever the hell you want in this game, and it's absolutely enjoyable to just be able to experiment with whatever you can do with your force abilities, and it's thoroughly enjoyable. I thoroughly enjoy it a lot if I'm playing on the lower difficulties, but playing on Jedi Grandmaster, it was not an enjoyable time, and part of me sort of just dreaded and hated it, if I'm being completely honest with you. But other than that, all I can really say was that if you're playing on lower difficulties, you're going to enjoy it. You're going to enjoy the combat of this game a lot, and I think you should play it on the lower difficulties, specifically if you're also looking for a challenge. I think Jedi Master is probably going to be an equal balance of difficulty, but still enjoyment, because you're still also playing for the story, and I think it should be like that because not every Star Wars fan plays video games, and a lot of what Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is supposed to do is that it's supposed to add on more story and more lore to the existing universe, because I've heard this like a couple times before, but apparently EA games are canon to the Star Wars universe. So for those who want to learn more about the Star Wars universe, they have to play Jedi Fallen Order and be able to experience it to be able to know more about the lore in the universe. So it has to be an equal amount of difficulty, but an equal amount of enjoyability and experience that a Star Wars fan should be able to have with the gameplay, at the very least, to be able to where they feel like they're actually wielding a lightsaber and feel like they're a badass. And yeah, if you're playing on lower difficulties, like I said, you're gonna get that experience. But if you're playing on the highest difficulty possible, Jedi Grandmaster, I'm gonna be honest, I think you're gonna have a terrible time, and I highly recommend that you don't play on the highest difficulty, because you're either gonna get extremely frustrated to the point where you're gonna break some shit, or you're gonna get extremely frustrated and you're never gonna play the game again. Easily the thing that I found the most enjoyable about Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order was its story. And without spoiling too much, all I'm gonna say is that this is definitely the Star Wars experience that people have probably been waiting for since The Force Awakens came out in 2017. This Star Wars experience, in terms of its story, is definitely one that any Star Wars fan, regardless if you play video games or not, I think this is something that you definitely should, get a chance to play, because it definitely is one of my more favorited Star Wars stories, even though I haven't had a chance to read any of the Expanded Universe comics, or now the Legacy comics, because they're no longer canon. But this was definitely a story that I enjoyed from beginning to end. And so let's talk a little bit about it without spoiling too much. And I'm basically just going to explain the basics of what you really need to know. The story follows along Cal Kestis, former Jedi Padawan who's on the run after Order 66. Obviously, with Order 66 being a thing and the Inquisitors being a thing, they're out hunting any Jedi or any Force-sensitive user out there, so that way the Empire can thrive and never have to worry about any Jedi rising up to stand against them. And obviously, with Cal Kestis being a Jedi, sort of, he's more so a Padawan, Obviously, he's being hunted down by any of the Imperial Inquisitors. And that's what happens. At the beginning of the game, he's just a normal scrapper. His identity gets revealed that he has force powers, and he then starts getting chased by Imperial Inquisitors. And as he's running away, you then meet two new characters along with your main transportation of the game, called the Mantis. And the two people that you do meet are named respectively Seer and Grease. Grease is, the witty, sarcastic, jokey, comedic relief pilot who, surprise, surprise, has a heart of gold. And Seer is actually the more interesting of the two, I feel like. He, or she, is a former Jedi who cut herself off from the Force because she experienced a little too much of the dark side. And so, like I said, she cut herself from the Force. And so now it's up to the job of the three of them to go and find this thing called a holocron. And inside this holocron has the list of the names of Force-sensitive children throughout the entirety of the universe. And that's basically the setup for the game. That's the setup for the story. You have a motive, and the whole course of the game, you're trying to figure out more information on how to get this holocron, because it was specifically hidden for only a Jedi to be able to find. And that's essentially it. That's essentially the whole basis of the game. But even though that's pretty simplistic, and even though that seems like it's very minimalistic, along the way you end up meeting new and interesting characters along the way. You have very interesting character interactions with Cal and Seer, because throughout the entirety of the game you learn more about what she had to go through during the purge of, Order 66, and you end up finding out that she also had a Padawan herself, and she was actually then turned to the dark side. And spoilers, just minor spoilers, she's one of the Inquisitors, and you end up having to have to fight her. And I already mentioned her by my name earlier in the video. If you've already, seen that, I don't know how I'm gonna edit this video yet, but yeah, you end up figuring out that Seer had a Padawan. She was then turned to the dark side, and she ends up becoming one of the Inquisitors. And it's pretty surprising. It's pretty surprising when you figure that, and the story beats are just, hit in a specific way. The way that the game was written and the way that the character interactions were written, it was all very enjoyable, and you feel the sense of always wanting to learn what's going to happen next. And it's especially so because Cal isn't like the perfect character, but he's also sort of not really going through the hero's journey, I want to say, because by this point in the story, he's already had his training as a Padawan. He just hasn't been, being called a Jedi Knight yet. He's already had his training done by his own Jedi Master, Jaro Patal. Or Jaro Patal? Is that his name? I don't remember. I'm blanking on his name. I'm sorry. But he's already had his training. He was already a Padawan. He's already learned how to do, the force pull ability, the force push ability. He's already learned how to do all that. But the reason why he doesn't have these abilities in the beginning of the game is because he himself has also had a damaged connection to the Force. And so the whole entirety of the game, as you're unlocking new abilities, Cal himself in the story and in the lore, he's connecting himself back with the Force, and he's regaining his abilities, and he's relearning on how to actually be a Jedi again. And you're following along throughout all this, and it's thoroughly enjoyable as you see him connect himself back. And I just really enjoyed seeing him go through this journey of reconnecting himself back while still trying to rebuild the Jedi Order, and it was just thoroughly enjoyable. I thoroughly just wanted to see what happens next, see how the game was going to end. There's definitely a fair amount of fan service within the story, and especially the finale of the game after you beat the final boss, but there's a little bit of fan service. There are times where they actually name drop stuff like the Clone Wars, specifically because, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the video, this game takes place during the events of after Episode 3 but before Episode 4, so after Revenge of the Sith and before A New Hope. And it was just thoroughly enjoyable, and it seems like this makes sense for something like that to happen. And I'm glad we were able to experience a little bit between this time period between the two episodes. And I don't know, I really enjoyed it. I just really enjoyed seeing these characters interact with each other. I really like seeing their relationships build upon each other, and I always wanted to see more of what was going to happen. And minor spoilers, but Cal actually doesn't end up dying at the end of the game, and I know they may come to a surprise. Like, what, did you expect him to die? And it's like, yeah, kinda, because he doesn't exist in the current movie canons. You know, we don't hear anything about him. We don't see anything that could relate towards him or anything. He just exists within the video game universe so far of Star Wars, but he's still canon. You know, he's just in the video game so far, and he hasn't been brought into actual canon within the comics or the movies or etc. It just hasn't happened yet. But I'm very interested to see where Respawn is going to take this even further. I'm very interested to see what they're going to do with him next, because Seer is still alive at the end of the game, Cal is still alive at the end of the game, and they're both Force users. They're both Jedi, and I'm very interested to see what's going to happen next with these two characters. I think whatever happens next could definitely be very interesting, and I don't know. I'm not really like a Star Wars theorist or whatever. I'm just very interested in good storytelling, and I think this game's storytelling was done very well, and it was thoroughly enjoyable. As a sort of like mediocre, like average, not average, but you know, casual Star Wars fanatic, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I just wanted a good Star Wars experience, and I got that out of this game. And I think any Star Wars fan who loves Star Wars to death and knows everything about the lore, has read every single legacy comic, who has seen every single movie, and does Star Wars theories for a fucking living, you're gonna enjoy this game thoroughly. And I hope you do play it, because it's definitely enjoyable. Alright, so without keeping this video going on for much longer than it needs to, because it's already probably over like 20 minutes or so, I don't want to waste much more of your time, but the last thing I want to talk about is just more so the gripes I had with the game, with not necessarily the things with the story or with the gameplay or anything, because I liked both. Obviously, I already talked about how much I really liked those two parts. But the thing that I had a really big issue with the game was the fact of performance issues, stability, and glitches. I didn't experience too many glitches in my game. Not if really any at all. Just a whole bunch of stuttering with frame drops, and just the fact that characters would glitch out every now and again. Every now and again, I would go into a boss fight, and the character that I'm fighting would then T-pose. But that's really kind of it. That's really the only stability issues that I really had, and bugs and glitches that I experienced in my playthrough. I've seen other people have different types of experiences with this game. Not to say that it completely ruins the game, because although it does have some bugs and glitches and some stability issues with playing on a PS4 Slim like I did, there were frame drops every now and again. It wasn't so bad to where it wasn't to the point where I couldn't continue on playing. I continued on playing, and I still had an amazing experience, but admittedly, there were times where characters, like troopers or something like that, would spawn in a little bit late, and you would be able to see that. There were times where characters would then T-pose or Gmod stiffy mode, whichever you want to call it. There were a couple of times where that would happen, and sometimes it would be a little annoying to see that, because I was hoping that the game would be able to be, fully stabilized and it wouldn't be that big of an issue, but for some reason it was, and that kind of sucks. But granted, the amount of time that I want to say that Respawn had in order to make this game, which was, I want to say, barely like a year and a half worth of development time, I would say that they didn't really have enough time to really smooth things out, and they just couldn't really get around the time to be able to do that. They were too focused on making the gameplay enjoyable, but also make the story enjoyable and then fit within the universe of Star Wars, but they didn't have time to really fix all the bugs and glitches and issues that the game had. If you want to see what other people have experienced with bugs and glitches, go and watch other people's videos, because they do exist and they do need to be fixed, and they probably aren't going to be fixed because Respawn is probably working on something else, maybe another Fallen Order game, or maybe another Star Wars game, just of some kind, revolving around Cal in some sort of way. But maybe they're also just working on other stuff, like another Titanfall game, maybe more on Apex Legends. I have no idea, but I just wanted to mention that really quick at the end of the video, because those were things that really did get in the way a couple times, but they weren't game breaking and they didn't ruin my experience, and I was able to overlook that over anything else, because the game was just that much enjoyable, and I was willing to overlook that. And that's why I mentioned Fallout 76 earlier, because Fallout 76's gameplay and overall just content was just not good, and what made that even worse was its bugs and glitches. And I think these are two good examples of games that have bugs and glitches, but one game is still polished enough to where it's still enjoyable and you're willing to overlook that, whilst the other was just a buggy, glitchy, utter mess. So, tits for developers out there. Give your team more time in order to be able to develop your fucking games. Not really developers, but more so the publishers. Publishers, give your development teams enough time to actually make a fucking game before they actually release a trailer at the very least. But that's pretty much it. That's all I have to really say for this part of the video. And that's pretty much it. That's all I really have to say about Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. This was a game that I saw at the beginning of the year for 2019, and I was pretty excited for it. You know, it was another Star Wars game. Unfortunately, it was, you know, licensed and published by EA, but hopefully with Respawn working on it, it was going to be an enjoyable experience, and it's a single-player Star Wars experience, and I was just, at the very least, hoping it was going to be... At the very least, I was just hoping that it was just going to be a lot of fun. That was the most thing that I was worried about, and luckily for me and for a lot of people who had played this game, we got to enjoy something that was pretty special. I'm pretty excited for what Respawn is going to be working on next, if they are going to be working on another Star Wars game. But even then, whatever they're working on, I'm sure they're working, their hardest on it, and hopefully it ends up being good. But without further ado, that's pretty much the end of the video, because I have nothing else to add on top of this review for Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, other than it was a definite 8 out of 10 experience. There were a couple of things, a couple hiccups every now and again. I still have my gripes with the combat at the very least, but it wasn't so bad to where I couldn't enjoy it at any other lower difficulty other than, Jedi Grandmaster. I fucking hate Jedi Grandmaster with all my heart. But that's pretty much it. If you enjoyed the video for whatever reason, be sure to leave a like. If you aren't, subscribe for more videos just like this. I don't know when this video is going to be coming out. Depending on how long it takes to render for the video, it's probably going to come out either later tonight on Thursday or tomorrow morning on Friday. So whenever you see it is when you're going to see it. But without further ado, I'll see you guys next time. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. I'm out. Peace.